My guest today is Edward Thomson. Edward, how are you, my friend?
David, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. I was great to see you in London last week. Now that you've moved to the UK, and you're since the time I saw you before that, you've changed jobs. What are you doing these days?
I have changed jobs. Yeah, I work for a company called Stacklok. Stacklok is a relatively new startup. Um, and historically, Stacklok is a really interesting startup.
Tell me.
And the reason that I got into it was because of the people, and in particular, the two co-founders. So Stacklok was started by Craig McLuckie, who started the Kubernetes project. He was sort of the PM at Google who worked on Compute Engine and then on Kubernetes. And I know you had Brennan Burns
Yeah,
on your show recently.
fascinating
So
show. Yeah.
yeah, so Craig and Brennan worked together there building out Kubernetes. And Craig's great, incredible guy. Also incredible is his co-founder, Luke Hines. Luke started a project called SigStore, which you can sort of, the way I like to think of it, and I'm not an expert in these things, right, is that it's sort of like code signing, but simpler, kind of like Let's Encrypt, but for code signing. If you remember ye olde days when you needed a SSL cert for your website, you'd have to like fax in some documentation and send huge checks. And Let's Encrypt sort of changed that so that you could just get an SSL cert really easily.
Oh, okay.
That was also true for code signing back in
Oh, cool.
ye olde days,
I'd love tools
where
like
you
that
needed.
because they've been democratized the process of
That's
things like
exactly right.
getting an HTTPS site up.
Yeah, exactly. And so, SigStore really helped move forward code signing, both technically and just like politically. So it's much easier. And so I joined Stacklok a little over a year ago as the first product manager. So like the first like non-executive PM type person, just like as an ICPM, thinking about the two products that we had been working on. And so taking the idea of Kubernetes from Craig and the idea of security from Luke, we were working on one product in particular, and that was really what I was focused on, a product called Minder. So it's an open source sort of platform for doing security for your organization. So you define your security policy, kind of like in a similar style to the way you define a Kubernetes configuration. You define like the security you want in your organization. Things like, I want to make sure that artifacts are signed, have code signing, or like, I want to make sure that every repository in my organization has, I don't know, secret scanning turned on,
Okay.
or
So you
branch protection turned on.
declaratively set up these end goals, and then when it
That's
figures
exactly
out
right.
how to do it.
That's right. So it tells you when you're out of compliance with that configuration, and then it drives you back into compliance, right? It doesn't just like give you a big, annoying dashboard with a bunch of red on it. It also will then go turn secret scanning on. And so that was, again, it's kind of like Kubernetes meets security.
Yeah.
Really exciting. I like that project a lot. It's an open source project that we've contributed to the Open Source Security Foundation, the OpenSSF.
I understand you pivoted after
well, right. And so we're interested in a handful of things, right? So that was one of the first products we produced. The second project that we worked on it's called Stacklok Insight. It looks at all of the different package ecosystems. So NPM and Cargo for Rust packages, stuff like that. And it analyzes the projects in them, and it can tell you like, are there CVEs on this project? Has it stopped being updated?
CVE is...
Sorry, CVE is and this is a terrible name, common vulnerability and exposure, which doesn't elucidate anything about what it actually is. So the CVE database was started by, I think, MITRE, which is a security contractor in Virginia. And the idea is every project that has some sort of security vulnerability will be tracked there, and it'll get a CVE, which is just a number. So like CVE 2024-3790 is, a security vulnerability that was discovered and reported in the year 2024. And then that will map to some sort of software project, and then it will tell you, ideally, the problem in that project, like the security vulnerability, have some sort of severity. Is it a high risk problem, a low risk problem, and then the versions that are affected and the versions that you need to update to be rid of that. So, in the old days, you were running SendMail on a publicly accessible server, and there was a CVE, and then you would go and upgrade SendMail. Now there's just, there's an exponentially increasing number of CVEs every year. And the reason for that is because, there's more software. But also there are various, disclosure programs that will pay out for people who find and responsibly disclose security problems. For example, like I found a vulnerability in .NET. I reported it to Microsoft. They fixed the problem. And since I reported it to them, instead of just like taking advantage of it to go, I don't know,
a bug bounty,
break into their customers' computers. Yeah, I got a bug bounty. And so people are incentivized to find security vulnerabilities and report security vulnerabilities. And having a CVE is a bit of it helps your resume if you're a security researcher.
I see.
So, we're seeing both more software and more, which means more security problems, but also people are incentivized to go find those security problems. So we're seeing more CVEs every year. So having a database like Stacklok Insight helps you as a consumer understand if the sort of software packages that you're adding to your software project are good. Do they have CVEs? Are they being actively maintained? You can sort of define what good is based on a variety of signals. And we've got an opinion on that, of course, but we also give you the raw data. And so that was sort of the other founding technology for Stacklok. But as we were developing these two tools, you've been paying attention for the last year or couple of years. Generative AI is everywhere.
I've heard something about this generative AI.
Yeah, once a little bit. Yeah, I just watched the talk you had with Jennifer Marsman, and that was
very bright lady.
Oh my goodness! But that was a great one. But yeah, generative AI has taken over the industry, and we started using it as we were building Minder and building Stacklok Insight. We started using tools like Copilot, like Cursor, like Climb, whatever. Everybody had their favorite within the organization. But as we were starting to use them, we started having some concerns about them. And this is not particularly, a bash on any of these models. But there's been some really interesting security research around some of the data that they produce. Let me give you a concrete example. You might ask a question like, as I'm writing a Python web app, you might say something like, how would I add OAuth 2 support to this? And the LLM would think, and then it would come back and give you some code to use a off-the-shelf OAuth library, like some sort of Python OAuth library, and how you would use that in your application. Now, the question is this Python OAuth library that it's suggesting you use any good? And that actually goes back to that Stacklok Insight sort of question. Is this software project, this other library, this open source project, is it any good?
So one way to test that is to see if it has any of these CVEs associated with it.
That's right.
Or more specifically, unresolved CVEs.
Unresolved CVEs. That's exactly right. So you want to think about the version of the package that you're using. And yeah, does it have any CVEs? Is it still being maintained? Like the most popular OAuth package for Python actually isn't being maintained anymore, and they tell you to go use something else.
Hmm.
And so, since these tools are trained on a corpus of data, one, it might, they might, it depends on the tool, the model, depends on a lot of things, but they might actually pick up a not particularly good, but particularly popular
Right.
package. And that could be bad.
Sure.
But they also have some other problems, like, there is a event horizon for what they're trained on. And so they don't necessarily know anything about packages or software projects or the vulnerabilities, the security problems that have been discovered after that event horizon, after that training date. And
Mhm.
some things we'll use like a RAG or something along those lines to sort of freshen up that data, but there's still a risk there.
Right.
And the other thing is that they can, I wouldn't say they have a tendency to, but they can hallucinate things. And there is some security research around this where a security researcher has prompted a language model to get it to suggest a package, and the package that the language model returned didn't exist. And
Hmm.
so at that point, the security researcher created the package, put it in the registry, made it available, and now that language model went from hallucinating something that didn't exist to telling you about a package that a security researcher owns. And so you install it and it says, well, whoopsie. And they're tracking the number of times this happens.
Yeah.
But that could be
That could be a
a
nefarious
nation.
person doing that. It's they
Absolutely.
discover this hallucination and say, "Oh, let's put our spyware in here and
That's
name it
exactly
this."
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was the thing that we recognized, was that there's an opportunity here for us as a security focused tech company to help people use generative AI. And so we started working at the end of 2024. We started working on this tool called CodeGate. And really, this was as much for us as it was something that we could contribute back to the community. So it's an open source project, and you can go and use it. You can go and hack on it. We'd love it if you did. But the idea behind CodeGate is that it's a gateway between you, the developer, your IDE, and the language models. And the first thing that we really were thinking about was this package problem, where a language model will suggest some code and a new package for you to use to solve your problem, and it's not a good package, right? We basically took the ideas and the data set from Stacklok Insight and put it into your AI. So
I see.
now, yeah. So if you say something like, "Hey, I'm writing this Python app. I'd like to do OAuth. Can you suggest some code? Can you suggest a package?" Um, if that uh, if that language model suggests a particularly bad package, whether that's has vulnerabilities, whether it's malicious, then CodeGate can actually, as an intermediary, stop that and say, well, actually, we've looked at our like very fine tuned, you know, data set on package information, and we've discovered that that's actually not the best package. So it'll just give you a little
Okay.
security warning right in your IDE.
I see. So. This is what we should be doing anyway. I think I've always liked the fact that Microsoft's generative AI tool is called GitHub Copilot. I love the fact that they have the word "co" in there to emphasize the fact that you're still the pilot. That this is just guidance. It's not running things, and therefore, you know, trust but verify is sort of the message that everything that comes out here, it's great. It'll get you most of the way there. If you're writing code, you can get, I don't know, 80%, 90% of your code written, but it's not dogma, it's not gospel. It's you need to vet whatever's coming back, and you've taken that vetting step, which we should be doing anyway. And right now, for me, it's a manual step, maybe looking in these CVE database, and finding out if this is a really good thing, maybe doing some just online research on my own. You're automating that process. After
That's
the
right.
suggestion comes back, check to see if there are any vulnerabilities, and then provide a recommendation, maybe a warning message if there are. That's
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 exactly right.
that's what's what I'm seeing.
That's right. And what you're saying is exactly correct. And what we've seen in talking to developers who are using generative AI is that they tend to do exactly what you're describing, especially as they start using generative AI tools, and especially if they're sort of more senior or more advanced in career. They I don't want to say that they're distrustful, but they use it more as an assistant, more as a
Trust but
co-pilot.
verify.
They trust but verify. That's exactly right. So they'll ask something, and it may be as simple as how do I do this, but it may also just be like, one thing I've heard from a lot of people is that they use Copilot, for example, as a code search engine. They stop using Google and now they just use Copilot for their search. And so they do exactly what you're saying. They trust but verify. They get that data back, they think about it, they look at it. If there's package recommendations, they'll vet them either with a tool like Stacklok Insight, or there's a handful of these sorts of tools that will give you take a package and give you a score, or they'll go straight to the repository, the GitHub repository, or the package registry to see when it was published, who is doing the publishing, those sorts of things. But as people get more used to using these generative AI tools, or as they, or more junior, earlier in career developers, they tend to be a little bit more trusting. So as you use it, your trust
Maybe
level
too
goes
trusting.
up. Yeah, maybe too trusting. Or
Yeah.
the AI native, the people who are just getting started with development and they've always used Copilot, they're more likely to start taking its suggestions and use it instead of and do a little less verification.
Sure. There's also time constraints as well. Sometimes it's just
That's
you're
right.
under deadline
Everybody's in a
and
hurry.
there's not time to vet things properly.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so we saw a lot of value with CodeGate when it came to this package information, and we started thinking, well, CodeGate now can sit between a developer and the language model, and it can start to think about the data coming back. We started thinking about, well, what kind of problems exist in the data that's going to the models, and actually it's a little frightening if I'm completely honest with you. This never occurred to me, right? Like, this is I didn't really start thinking about AI generative coding tools until I came to Stacklok. When I was, my previous jobs, AI coding tools existed, but I was focused on like sort of the core technologies. Like at Vercel, I was the product manager that oversaw everything but AI. Right? Vercel has this really cool AI coding tool called V0, and I looked after the other stuff in the company. And so like it was sort of a blind
That's
spot to
interesting
me.
because the AI tool, the Gen AI tool I use the most often is GitHub Copilot, and you have a lot of experience working for GitHub.
I do, but I never worked on Copilot when I was at
Got
GitHub.
it.
I worked on Actions, I worked on the npm package registry, things like that. And so, like, until I came to Stacklok, I never really was that familiar with generative AI tooling, and so I was really shocked to discover. Well, so let me explain this. My understanding of this in a nutshell, right? You you have your code open in an IDE. You ask whatever tool, Copilot, what have you, for some recommendations. And what it will do is, sure, it will take that prompt that you gave it and it will look in its database, but it will also give the LLM a bunch of context. And that will just be a big help in really tailoring your response. So if you're in a file, I don't know, foo.py, and you ask the LLM, hey, how would I do this? It's going to upload foo.py or some parts of foo.py or some other parts of your project as context to the LLM so that it can make better, more tailored suggestions for you. And that's great, right? That's what helps LLMs give you better answers. The problem is that you don't actually have a lot of control over what's going out to the LLM.
Yeah.
So if you have a .env file, for example, that has like some local API keys or something to talk to your staging server, this or a staging
You
database,
certainly don't want the
development
LLM to
database.
know about that, at
Don't
least not
want your LLM to
publicly.
know about that.
Or if you
That's
do,
right.
you don't want it to share it publicly.
That's exactly right. And this is just the way that everybody does things, right? You've got a .env file as you develop code. It's not particularly terrible to do this as long as your git ignore file is set up correctly, which I trust that it is. And we can talk about git ignore files all day if you want, David. You know me. I want to talk about
Right.
Git,
Yeah.
but
well, we're scoped for time, so let's stick to the topic.
I'll yeah. We'll have me back on. We'll talk more about Git. But
I will.
The LLM doesn't pay attention to that, right? It's just more context, and so it could upload this data, and ideally that's not a problem. But you're putting an API key. It's leaving your computer. It shouldn't do that. And who knows what the LLMs do? I know that some of them will certainly not train on context, but others have a pro plan that says they won't train on context. And so what does the free plan do then? It's a little frightening, but like, even if you trust them, and I do for the most part trust them, you just don't even want that egressing your computer. You don't want it hitting a proxy where your organization may have a transparent proxy that does some sort of stateful inspection. You don't even want it to hit that. Like, you trust your organization. They're not going to do anything malicious, except it could end up in a log file somewhere. Like, this is just bad on every level.
Hole into your one more security vulnerability that's potentially.
That's exactly right. That's right. And so this is just bad. And so one of the things that CodeGate does, this was sort of its second feature, was it will redact that information. So if you start to send any information as context out or in a prompt, CodeGate will stop that, and it'll replace it with just a token that it will then send out. So the LLM actually does get the context and understands that there's some sort of opaque value there, but it won't be your opaque value. It'll be something completely replaced, and then we can replace it on the way back. So it never leaves your computer now.
All right. So it'll understand if you have, I don't know, an environment variable for the computer name, the server name. It'll recognize that and communicate the fact that this is a server name, but it actually will eradicate or obfuscate the actual name of the server.
Well, the first thing it did was things like like API tokens and secret keys. But we've actually started growing that up into other sorts of PII. So, you might have email addresses maybe in your source code, but certainly in like maybe some training data. Ideally not like real customer PII, right? There's a lot of restrictions on not having real customer PII. And developers are really pretty good about following that. Like, pretty good. Exactly. We've all seen that. Maybe
you and I are. I think that's true.
We've all seen that, where it's just like, yes, we have this corpus of training data that is anonymized training data, and I don't know, maybe you've been inspecting some, live site or production incident, and you have just a little bit of data about a problem that you were debugging. It happens all the time to all of us. Even if it only happens once, 0.001% of the time, you don't want that data going.
Right.
I mean, you don't want that data on your hard drive to begin with, and you definitely don't want it going out to an LLM or anything outside of your computer. So we're looking more at the PII. So things like email addresses. Things like that you might want to keep contained.
So CodeGate really has the two major features to it. One is, and it's dependent on the direction. One is I'm getting information from AI, and I want to vet that information, make sure that the packages don't contain vulnerabilities. And the other is I'm sending information out to the AI in terms of prompts and in terms of contexts and files, and I want to obfuscate anything that's potentially secure information or either PII or um, maybe a secret of some kind.
That's right. So those were the first two major pieces of functionality that we added. And we also added a dashboard so that you could see the back and forth on this, so that you could understand what was being said. Got to have a dashboard. That's right. But as we've been working on CodeGate, we've been adding more functionality to it, because now you've got this tool that exists, and there's a handful of prompt gateways, but most of them sit out on on some other server. This one sits right on your machine, so
you catch it closer to the source.
That's exactly right. And as we were sort of building this and thinking about what else we could do with this dashboard, we started working on what we call workspaces, and that's the first. It's a little bit more general and a little bit more generally useful, really. And the idea is that you can organize and personalize your integrations with coding assistance. So you can sort of split it up so that as you're working on different projects, each software project that you work on has a different workspace in CodeGate. And so the idea is that it might talk to a different LLM. You might discover that GitHub Copilot is great for your JavaScript code and your Ruby code, but it's not very good for COBOL. Maybe you've got some old line of business application kicking around and you need to open it up, or I don't know, maybe
perfect for COBOL.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe you write a lot of documentation and you find that something like ChatGPT does a little bit better with English language than Copilot. So you can, as you navigate between different software projects, you can select a different workspace in CodeGate, and it will route to a different LLM based on your preferences. The other thing it can do is it can add prompts on top, so it can sort of enhance those prompts. So, like if you're working on, a web app, for example, you can have a prompt that's tailored to Next.js apps and React, and it can give you better, slightly, nicer suggestions and completions. And when you switch over to that Ruby project, you can have a Ruby specific prompt. And so it
kind of grounds those prompts in the context of whatever you're working on.
That's exactly right.
That's cool. Exactly right. Edward, we're just about at time. People, this is really interesting. Where do people go for more information?
CodeGate.ai, CodeGate.ai, and it's an open source project, so you can find it on GitHub from there, and we've got a community on Discord that you can interact with as well. All linked from our website at CodeGate.ai.
I'm looking at it right now. Real quickly, what's your revenue model then if it's an open source project?
It's it's like the change bank from Saturday Night Live. We'll make it up in volume.
What? Are you selling services around that, or is there a freemium model, or what's the?
At this point, there's not. At this point, we're just building out a useful project that people can use in an open source community around it.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Edward. I've learned a lot today.
Thanks, David. Really appreciate you having me on. Friends don't let friends use Gen AI technology without some safeguards.